Hello, this is Sam Gerrans from samgerrans.com. Today is Monday, May the 8th, 2023, and today the subject is Your Mind is Controlled by Propaganda. And today being Monday, it means it's a long-form presentation, which means I'm going to be reading and talking about the work actually at this stage in my project of Jacques Ellul, or Jacques Ellul if you speak English, or doesn't matter what you speak, does it? And this is the book I'm going to be looking at today, and which I'm kind of working my way through because it's quite difficult reading, but it's essential to understand how propaganda works. And I mean, if you think about it, where are we now? It's May the 8th, so tomorrow's May the 9th, and in the country that I happen to live in, which is Russia, we're in the lead up. May the 9th is the big celebration of the end of the Second World War. And if you think about the Second World War, well, that was entirely fueled by propaganda. We're still suffering from propaganda from the Second World War. The propaganda doesn't go away. It just turns into something else. It turns into sort of ongoing myth and so on. In this war, 27 million Russians died, and a whole lot of other Europeans died, and people from other countries, Indians, all kinds of people died in that war. And if it weren't for propaganda, it wouldn't have happened. So that's really partly why I'm interested in this subject. Now, this is, as I say, is a long form presentation, which means a bit of it's going to be on the public streaming platforms, YouTube, Rumble and Odyssey, something like that. But all of it will be on my Substack for my paid subscribers. It's we're living in the real world, and this is just the reality of the real world. So we'll get into it now. This is his introduction to the section which is called The Characteristics of Propaganda. I just have to say firstly about Jacques Ellul, he was writing, this book was written, I think, 1964, so it's older than me. Not many things are, but this is. And so whatever he said was pre-internet, pre-AI, pre-machine learning, all of this stuff, and it was true then. Just think how much truer it is now. And we're just going to kind of work through the introduction, and I'm going to stop off and talk as we go. As I say, he was an academic. He was a very clever man, and he was writing really for other academics. And so, it's like if you I don't know, have a streaming site or whatever you call it, and you're talking about gaming, then you're going to use that kind of language. Or if you're a mechanic, you're going to talk in that sort of language. Every specialization has a language. Well, he was an academic, so he talks in a way which is quite difficult to read, especially if you're coming from Facebook and Disney. But it's worth unpacking it. And as I may mention later, the reason why this is so important is that just nuclear holocaust, you just kill your body, right? But if you believe lies, if you believe in God in the last day, that can take you to hell. So that's why it's important. I'm not really here so much trying to teach you or encourage you what to think. That's never been my ethos. It's still not my ethos. It's really how to think. You may say, and you may be right. Yeah, well, this chap's suffering from propaganda as well. We're all affected by it. And in the work of Ellul, what you'll understand, well, I came to understand at least, is that this is an intrinsic part of the kind of society, the post-modernity that we live in, and it's intrinsic to it as water is to a goldfish. It's so much part of our life that we don't even notice it. Now, we're not going to get into it here, but just to recap, there are two basic strands of propaganda. And I know because as I've said before, I have a number of backgrounds, but one of them happens to be in public relations. I just fluked my way into a very high-powered job working closely with particularly, with the presidents of major corporations. And I didn't see anything particularly terrible there, but I understood how this worked. Well, I had to understand how it worked, and when I really worked it out, I was not sure that I wanted to continue in this. The clients that I worked for were actually, one of them was great, and the other one was just sort of neutral for me. But I knew that if I was going to be called upon to work for a pharmaceutical company, for example, I'd have to quit. And I also understood that this was back in 2008, 2009, 2010, I think around that time, that it was quite clear that the I mean, we hadn't got a name then, but the whole COVID thing was coming, because I used to travel all the time to different countries. It was part of my job. I would literally go, I spent literally one afternoon in Slovakia, okay, just as an example. I once had breakfast in Europe, if you count Russia and Moscow as being Europe, lunch in Asia, in Turkey, and supper in North Africa. It was a hectic time. It was very interesting. I met a lot of interesting people, and I'm not claiming to be in with the elites or anything like that, but I saw what I saw, and extrapolation is just happens to be one of my skills. So I could see how it all worked. So anyway, that's just a bit of background. Let's jump in and read. As I say, I'm going to stop at some point, and that will just be it for the streaming services. Everyone else who's subscribed to my Substack, paid subscribers, I think it's $10 a month. It means that I can continue to do what I do. It's, I know everything's supposed to be free, but it isn't. Anyway, let's just jump in. So this is chapter 1, the characteristics of propaganda, and it's page 3. True modern propaganda can only function within the context of the modern scientific system. But what is it? Many observers look upon propaganda as a collection of quote-unquote gimmicks and of more or less serious practices. And psychologists and sociologists very often reject the scientific character of these practices. For our part, we completely agree that propaganda is a technique rather than a science. Now, technique. What do we mean by technique? In Ilul's world, technique is it's more than technology. It's really what it is something which is purely rational and interested only in the outcome. It has no interest in you, your background, your history, your race, your culture, your religion, now even your sex. It will make you into whatever it deems more efficient for itself, and you have no choice. And it breaks down into basically 4, and I've gone into this into some detail, 4 sections, which we'll get into a bit later, 4 basic categories, which I'll include in the sort of YouTube, etc. version of this, but I'll get into that later. So it's an identifiable, reliable, repeatable methodology, a bit like making a cake. All right, so you're not guessing. It's not some abstruse form of alchemy. You're not sort of plucking it out of the sky. It's a method, and it works. And they know how to use it, and they're using it on you all of the time. I can't remember who said it now. Perhaps somebody will say in the comments. But it was the CIA director many years ago who said the time is coming when everything that the American public, and what he means by the American public is just everyone in the world, will be a lie, will be untrue. And I think they're pretty much there. Pretty much any major subject that you think about, that you think you know something about, is probably a lie in the sense that it's essentially dishonest. Doesn't mean there aren't some points of contact with objective reality, but you can be certain that the whole context of it is fallacious. And this is done. It's easy to look at this as just evil and get angry about it, but you have to understand. I mean, if you look, for example, at Ted Kaczynski, I mean, he would say that this is it's kind of woven into the waft and web of what a modern society is, because living in a modern society is existentially so horrific. If you really think about it, if you weren't propagandized all the time, you'd either lose your mind, or you'd you'd just go out and live in the woods, like Walden, Thoreau in Walden, or Kaczynski, which he did. I'm not here kind of shilling for Kaczynski or for Thoreau or for anything. I'm just saying that if you really stopped and looked at the abyss which is there, then that you would lose your mind. And I'm sure that mental institutions are full of perfectly sane people who can just see honestly what things are. I'm not saying everybody's like that, but I'm sure there are lots of people in there who are like that. To continue. But it is a modern technique That is, it is based on one or more branches of science. We won't get into what we mean by science. And I think when Ellul was writing, science actually meant something, whereas now science is almost entirely just another form of propaganda. Certainly they use the scientists, in inverted commas, as the modern, the sort of modern priesthood. And as an appeal to, it's one of the methods in this would be an appeal to authority. So you bring your experts, but everyone remember, you can get whatever expert you like. Reminds me of the chap who, I think he was building the Suez Canal, and they said to him, well, all these experts say it can't be done. He said, well, go and get some different experts. He understood. Propaganda is the expression of these branches of science. It moves them. It moves with them, shares their successes and bears witness to their failures. The time is past when propaganda was a matter of individual inspiration, i.e. sort of, plucking an idea out of the sky. Personal subtlety, i.e., for example, Machiavelli, or the use of unsophisticated tricks. Now science has entered propaganda, as we shall reveal from 4 different points of view, and what we're going to do is he's going to summarize these 4 points of view in what follows. First of all, modern propaganda is based on scientific analyses of psychology and sociology. Now, I'm going to stop here just for a moment and say, I talk quite a lot about women and the delusions that they suffer from on a kind of almost industrial scale today. And it's quite easy. I mean, thankfully, my audience is understanding, and this is kind of why I make long, boring videos. It weeds out, the people who just got a 30-second attention span. But the fact is that it is true, and it's undeniably the case. But I am not inveighing against women, and you can say a lot of analogous things about men today as well. But more particularly, it is women, and as I've said, they've been studied. So to take, for example, feminism, which I mentioned a couple of videos back, a chap called Aaron Russo, who made a very good film, if you can still find it, about the downfall of America. He was a movie producer, or as they say in America, film producer, and moved in those kinds of circles. And he was befriended by Nick Rockefeller, who, according to Russo, and he was an extremely personable man, and they became friends, and he enjoyed his company. He said he was crackling smart and really bright, and enjoyed his company, everything. And Rockefeller basically told him a bit of what the agenda was, which is to shuffle you lot into a prison, a tyranny, and there would be a kind of an elite class of people to whom all of those rules don't apply. Well, I mean, we're kind of there already. Excuse me. And Russo said, well, isn't that, that's not moral. And Nick Rockefeller was like, well, what do you care about the proles for? What do you care about that? What about them? He said, I mean, Russo was just a decent chap. He said, you can't do that anyway. It wouldn't work. And so Rockefeller said, well, where do you think, just to give him an example, where do you think feminism came from? And Russo said, well, I mean, it's fair. Women should have more opportunities, etc., etc. And as I've mentioned in other videos, all propaganda has some measure of truth to it. It has to. This isn't optional. It doesn't work otherwise. And Rockefeller said, well, we made that happen. We used propaganda. We studied women. We knew which buttons to press to get them to basically destroy their own societies and their own families. I'm inserting that there, but that's been the result. And what he said was we wanted to double the tax base, which also drives down men's wages, of course, which means that you need 2 now instead of 1 person working in a family to support a family, and so that we could educate the children in what we want. Look what's happening to your children right now. If you live in the West, it doesn't happen here in Russia, thank God, but it happens in the West. Look what they're doing, grooming your children. And when you send your child to school, you're basically entering into a kind of collusion with the school. You keep our child so we can carry on working, and we won't ask too many questions about what you're doing to their minds. So, yeah, that was that point. I'll just carry on. Step by step, the propagandist builds his techniques on the basis of his knowledge of man, and more particularly, I mean, he's using man in the pre-triggered sense, meaning mankind as a whole. But I must now make the point of saying, and particularly women. His tendencies, his desires, his needs, his psychic mechanisms, his conditioning. Well, conditioning is itself really propaganda. There are two types of propaganda. There's integrated propaganda, and there's what they call agitprop, or agitation propaganda. So, for example, your schooling is kind of, well, it's kind of a form of propaganda, but it's really this integrated propaganda. So you don't notice it. It is to the mind what water is to the goldfish. He just doesn't notice it. He swims around in it. You only notice it. I noticed it. I mean, I noticed it growing up because it's just a bit weird, I suppose. But I noticed it also. Learning a foreign language can help you understand it. If you set out to learn a foreign language and really learn it, then you understand there's a whole new way of thinking, a whole new set of connections in the mind. And it allows you to look at your first language and, more importantly, your first culture from a different point of view. Living in a foreign country, and I don't mean moving from London to Paris. I mean moving from London to Mozambique or something. That kind of culture shift will do it to you. So there are ways or things that can happen that will make you sort of start to understand things in these ways. But generally, your entire background is itself propaganda. And again, it's very easy to start thinking of like a plot. I mean, I would argue there is essentially, the people who control the money spigots, they certainly know which direction, aka, for example, Rockefeller et al. But the teacher, the green-haired teacher with the tattoos and the bits of metal through her face, indoctrinating your child into the wonders of not being able to tell the difference between men and women, she thinks she's doing a good thing. Yeah, probably. I mean, leaving aside all the mental issues, but she's not. She's not in on it. She's just a useful idiot. And so that's really what that background propaganda is there. It's to build useful idiots who'll just carry on repeating what they've imbibed. And I'm sure we all know lots of people like that. His tendencies, his desires, his needs, his psychic mechanisms, his conditioning, and as much on social psychology as on depth psychology. So it's interestingly, as we mentioned in the last one of these, propaganda is a mass phenomenon. If you read Gustave Le Bon, I think it's The Power of Crowds or something like that, he talks about this. This isn't something you can really even test on or test for on a one-to-one basis or even in small groups, because the way that people work, I mean, Black Lives Matter, okay, those people smashing up and smashing all the shops and Antifa and all the rest of it. I mean, I'm sure a lot of them are, certifiably nuts, but very, very few of them would do that on their own. Probably none. It's a mass experience. If you've ever been to a football match or a hockey match or something, you feel the power of the crowd. Well, this is what we're talking about. This isn't an individual psychological, psychiatric phenomenon. It's a group phenomenon. He shapes his procedures on the basis of our knowledge of groups and their laws of formation and dissolution. See, isn't he a tedious writer? I mean, it's turgid. But groups can form and dissipate instantly, like a flash mob. You have psychological flash mobs. They can last, or you can have, psychological groups that last for longer. At the moment, the big group on the block is the We Stand With Ukraine, psychosis, which is, I've talked about my thoughts on this before. I'm not going to go into it again, but what's true is most of those people couldn't find or couldn't have found Ukraine on the map and couldn't tell you anything at all, zero, about Ukraine or its history. They would know nothing about what led up to, Russia's unprovoked war of aggression. There you are. There's that. There you are. That's agitprop, though. That's what this is. But what happens is you form a group, and then they can have competing groups, all with their own propaganda. Anyway. of mass influences and of environmental limitations. Without the scientific research of modern psychology and sociology, there would be no propaganda. Oh, I'll just read that sentence again. Without the scientific research of modern psychology and sociology, there would be no propaganda, or rather, we would still be in the primitive stages of propaganda that existed at the time of Pericles or Augustus, i.e. ancient Greece or ancient Rome. Of course, they had their certain types of propaganda. But this is an intrinsically modern phenomenon. That's what we're talking about. If you read a book like Nudge by Cass Sunstein and somebody else, they're planning your next step. Okay. Without the scientific research of the blah, 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 blah. Of course, propagandists may be insufficiently versed in these branches of science. Okay, so the propagandists themselves may not be sufficiently, au fait with the intricacies of sociology and psychology. They may misunderstand them, go beyond the cautious conclusions of the psychologists, or claim to apply certain psychological discoveries that in fact do not apply at all. I mean, they say a little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink not or touch not the Pierian spring, I think it's Alexander Pope, if I'm not mistaken. But the idea is that propagandists are generalists. They may not understand all of the intricacies of the sciences, I would use inverted commas, that they use. That's the point he's making there. But the important thing is that propaganda has decided to submit itself to science and make use of it. Now, again, I just want to say, this was written 60 years ago, okay? Think how this is before machine learning, before AI, before the internet, before all of these things. This was written on the typewriter, what I'm reading to you right now, okay? Just if you're old enough to know what a typewriter was. Of course, psychologists may be scandalized and say that this is a misuse of their science. See, he has to address this because he's talking to other people who write equally boring books. And make use of it. Of course, psychologists may be scandalized and say that it is a misuse of their science. But this argument carries no weight. The same applies to our physicists and the atomic bomb. And again, it's going back to what I said earlier, that the reason why I'm kind of interested in, or why I'm spending the time to talk about propaganda is, I mean, you're going to die anyway. I mean, let's just cut to the chase. You're here for a limited period of time. So that's an established fact. I mean, if you're so delusional, you think obviously they want to stop that with all their transhumanism, but actually there's no way out of this. Okay, this is a fact. So that's our first sort of Boolean branch. The second Boolean branch is either you're going to go to, there's an afterlife, or there isn't. So there's your second one. And the third one is well, if there is one, well, then there's some kind of judgment involved, I would argue at least. So if what you believe is important, then propaganda has the power to take you to affect this ultimate pathway. That's why it's important. We've already established that you're already going to die. There's no way out of it. Nobody who was alive 200 years ago is alive today. It's just a fact. Okay, there's no way out of it. So, therefore, what you believe is important. It should be important if you accept that there is some sort of ultimate responsibility and accountability, and those who can make you believe lies can take you, according to this pathway, to hell. So that's why it's important. You see. The scientist should know that he lives in a world in which his discoveries will be utilized. You see, again, this is going back to the days when scientists were still supposedly, we kind of pushed this, and it's a form of propaganda of scientists as being this secular priesthood of objectively minded rationalists who are only single-mindedly in like a pith helmet, hacking their way through the jungle of deception and untruth to get to the holy grail of actual truth. A bit like that Hollywood movie with Harrison Ford. But they're not that at all. They're highly envious often, very possessive of their little domains, intriguing, financially compromised, typically, because by the time you've done your PhD, you're going to be so far in debt that the rest of your life is going to be spent trying to pay that off. I'm not saying they're all like this, but a lot of them are. And when you listen to experts, you can be certain that they're being paid. Okay, so their inventions will be used under technique in order to affect the highest possible yield. And usually that ends up in creating weapons and stuff. And it's all a weapon, and propaganda is a weapon. You just have to recognize it as such. And the point that I've made in previous talks is that we're not bound by any moral constraint whatsoever. Unlike Pericles and Augustus, who lived under moral constraints, here the only constraint is what you can get people to believe. That's it. There is no other constraint. Anyway, the scientist should know that he lives in a world in which his discoveries will be utilized. Propagandists inevitably will have a better understanding of sociology and psychology, use them with increasing precision, and as a result become more effective. So what he's saying is that even though they might not have a perfect understanding of these subjects, and even though he's kind of talking to his colleagues in related fields here, even though you still know more, the fact that they're using what you've learnt means that they can apply it in order to attain far more effective aims than they would have been able to without it. And he's making the comparison with nuclear war, which I think is, or nuclear weapons at least, which I think is an absolutely fair one. Anyway, I'm going to wrap that up here for my online subscribers. Details of where I upload to, how you can join my Substack and Telegram channel, support my work and download my books free are in the description. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.